Thanks everybody for coming. It's good to see a good crowd here. It's a very exciting time for all of us who love the boundary waters and the Quetico Superior ecosystem. We have both the state of Minnesota, and the Biden administration moving forward to protect our ecosystem and protect it from the greatest threat that it has ever faced, which is the threat of sulfide-ore copper mining in the headwaters of the boundary waters, the Quetico Park, Voyageurs National Park, three great protected landscapes in northern Minnesota and southern Canada. So I'm going to walk you through what has happened over the last couple of weeks, which create tremendous opportunities for you, the people, to be involved in protecting the world's greatest protected canoe country wilderness. I'm going to start with a short video clip. I think many of you know that one of our greatest champions and supporters was Walter Mondale. He was Vice President of the United States from 1976 till 1980, when the 1978 Boundary Waters Wilderness Bill was passed and signed into law by President Carter. That law took the 1964 Wilderness Act, which provided for the inclusion of the boundary waters in the National Wilderness Preservation System, and cleaned up incompatible uses that were allowed only in the boundary waters. So he's been involved in protecting the boundary waters since 1978, and frankly, in the years before. Excuse me. So unfortunately, Vice President Mondale passed away last April. He had penned 5 opinion editorials calling for permanent protection of the boundary waters from copper nickel mining. He was working on his 6th, and his 6th, like one before, would have been placed in the New York Times. And the one that he was working on when he passed away would have been written to his friend, Joe Biden. So we don't have Fritz with us today, but we have him reading one of the opinion editorials he wrote for you, the people, urging protection of the boundary waters.
Are we generous enough, mature enough to refuse short-term gain in order to avert long-term calamity? Our children's legacy depends on the answer.
The boundary waters is beloved, which is why Minnesotans have fought so hard to protect it. Few perhaps, with the fervor and determination of Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale leaves behind an enduring legacy that calls upon us to protect the boundary waters for those of us here now and for generations to come.
The Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters, which is headquartered here in Ely, and many of you are a part of it. And thank you very much for being part of the Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters. We are focused on protecting and preserving the 4.3 million acre Quetico Superior ecosystem, which consists of the Superior National Forest, and within the Superior National Forest, the 1.1 million acre Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, the most visited wilderness area in America. Quetico Provincial Park, which is another 1.1 million acres of spectacular wildlands, and then downstream, Voyageurs National Park at 250,000 acres. We are the lead organization in Minnesota with this mission and working to protect and preserve it. I want to talk a bit about water. This map depicts the Rainy River drainage basin. Up here is the international boundary. Up above it is Quetico Provincial Park. This bright green is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and downstream is Voyageurs National Park. This line is the Laurentian Divide, the Continental Divide. All surface waters north of the Laurentian Divide flow north into the boundary waters, into Quetico, downstream to Voyageurs, and then north onto Hudson Bay. Now, that map is interesting because it does a great job of illustrating the problem we have today. 50% of the Rainy River headwaters is protected as national wilderness. In that area, no mining is allowed. In that area, no water quality degradation is allowed. Zero water quality degradation. The upstream half, all the white, is not protected. It's not protected from mining. It's not protected from water quality degradation from industrial activities. So you have half of the watershed now open to industrial activities, where all the water flows north into an area where we have been saying since 1902, this place is special. This is the greatest canoe country wilderness in the world. We're not going to degrade water quality. We're not going to allow mining. That's the conflict that we have been addressing since 2012 with the threat of sulfide-ore copper mining in the headwaters of these great landscapes. That's right. This map covers a little more geography. It's the Rainy River drainage basin. So the map we were looking at before is the Rainy River headwaters, which is a sub-watershed of the larger Rainy River drainage basin. But you can see again, the boundary waters. Up here is the Quetico. Some of our wonderful lakes are easy to depict on this map, and downstream is Voyageurs National Park. This map depicts in red areas, touching the wilderness in red, where the Antofagasta's mining company, Twin Metals, has two unlawfully reinstated federal mineral leases and where it would like to develop copper nickel mining. Those four turquoise triangle or polygons represent mineral deposits. The orange represents federal prospecting permits. Early in our campaign, with your help and your guidance, we started developing science, excellent, comprehensive, peer-reviewed science. Some of the most important science we ever developed was our hydrogeology science, which has been peer-reviewed and published. And what that science tells us is that no matter what, in the ordinary operation of a sulfide-ore copper mining along the South Kawishwe River and Birch Lake, pollution, water quality degradation would flow north along this path and enters the wilderness at Fall Lake. So that's the risk of sulfide-ore copper mining in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And this is just a fun depiction of the same thing, a little bit of animation. Fun might not be the right word. When we set out organizing the campaign, which now has over 400 businesses, conservation groups, and hunting and fishing groups, we agreed that this was just the wrong place for sulfide-ore copper mining. And we united around a goal, and the goal is a permanent ban on sulfide-ore copper mining in the watershed of the Boundary Waters. We all agree on this goal. So how do we achieve this goal? We had a four-part strategy. The first part was to encourage the U.S. Forest Service, which manages the Superior National Forest and the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, to apply for a federal mineral withdrawal. A mineral withdrawal was a term of art that was not well known when we started talking about it in Minnesota. It's a ban. The policy of the United States since 1910 has been that we, the people of America, don't develop all of the minerals that we, the people, own. We own 640 million acres of America in this country. That's a lot. But some of those minerals are in national parks. Would we dig up Old Faithful to get at minerals underneath Old Faithful. And the decision is, no, that place is too valuable in its natural state. So how do we make those decisions? The law has provided for more than 100 years that the executive branch of the federal government has the power and authority to study issues around mining in valuable and vulnerable places and make decisions to set aside those lands and minerals for up to 20 years. That's the withdrawal. You withdraw lands and minerals from federal mining programs. So we set out through science and involvement of all of you and the other people in America to convince the Forest Service that the headwaters of the Boundary Waters was the wrong place. And I must say, over the last 9 years, being involved with groups and mineral withdrawals all around the country, that there really is no other place in America that is more wrong than this place. We have a canoe country wilderness, a water-based ecosystem, the cleanest water in America, abundant water. You can drink out of the water in the lakes in the Boundary Waters. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency calls our water throughout our watershed exceptionally clean and immaculate. It is the backbone of our regional economy. It's a place of outstanding biodiversity. It is a rare and unique and healthy and intact ecosystem, tremendously important as we address the climate and extinction crisis in the world. So we set out on this road using science and all of you. And at the end of the day in 2016, the Forest Service said, you are right, and applied for a 20-year mineral withdrawal. Now that application was filed a month before President Trump took office. But we worked hard and continued to build an enduring campaign that would withstand multiple administrations and multiple points of view. We worked hard to keep that study going with the Forest Service. 181,000 of you submitted comments during the comment periods in 2017 and 2018. That broke all records in Minnesota. 2,700 of you attended in-person meetings with the Forest Service. The record was extraordinarily strong. Science, economics, polling showed that 70% of Minnesotans wanted this withdrawal. People love the Boundary Waters. It's a core part of who we are as Minnesotans. But no matter how hard we worked, we could not overcome the politics. And the politics were simple. Donald Trump believed he could win Minnesota in 2020 if he killed that mineral withdrawal process. And so he did so at a political rally in Duluth for candidate Pete Stauber. That's how he did it. No science, no economics. He didn't care about 70% of Minnesotans. He killed it. So we thought, well, let's work with our friends in Congress and see if we can't get all of that material from 20 months of analysis and share it with the American people. So the chairs of 3 powerful committees in the House, which is turned over to Democrat control after the 2018 elections, they all asked for all this work, 20 months of a federal mineral withdrawal. Senator Tina Smith and Senator Amy Klobuchar asked for the same thing. The Minnesota DNR asked for the same thing, and they were stonewalled. Finally, our partner, the Wilderness Society, sued because they had asked for it in a Freedom of Information Act request and got 0. And under court oversight in their FOIA case, they were given a draft environmental assessment. It was 60 pages long. It was the state of the review at the time President Trump canceled it. There was a cover page that said September 2018 Superior National Forest mineral withdrawal. And the next 59 pages were entirely redacted, black. 59 pages of black. Now, what people in Congress have said to us, we see national security stuff all the time, and it's not redacted nearly as much as this environmental assessment was. So obviously somebody was hiding something. And what was being hidden was that the science and the economics are very clear. This is the wrong place for a copper mine. So we had to go back to the drawing board, work hard to get the process going again. And last Wednesday, President Biden's administration announced they were starting the process again, and it started on Thursday. We'll talk a little bit about what you can do now to make sure that we have science-based decision-making in this country, which will lead to the protection of the boundary waters. We also knew, still under Part 1, that there were two very old federal mineral leases that read on the map, very sensitive places. The Spruce Road deposit lease reaches up and touches the wilderness by Gabriel Lake, by the Kooishwee River. Can you imagine that, a mine there? It's a very shallow deposit. You can go there now and still see sulfide-bearing ore on the surface that was dug up by Inco, which was the original holder of the leases in the early 1970s. And until the Forest Service bulldozed a road in for logging, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, you could still see the orange acid mine drainage flowing off that bulk sample site. Those leases were issued in 1966, but they required that Inco, International Nickel, commercially produce ore by 1986. Well, they've never been developed. And if there was no commercial production, Inco lost all rights to those mineral leases. Now, leases are managed by the Bureau of Land Management in the Department of Interior. BLM could voluntarily renew leases. It's within its discretion. And so it did renew the leases twice. But when we started down this road as a community concerned about copper mining in the headwaters, those leases had expired. And what was interesting about those leases is that there had never, ever been environmental review of the leases. If they were modern leases, newly issued, environmental review was required. They were grandfathered in for the two renewals because they had been issued before the National Environmental Policy Act was enacted. But we had really smart pro bono lawyers who said to us, environmental review is required, even though they've been grandfathered in, if you can demonstrate that the potential exists that mining in those leased areas had the potential to negatively impact a national wilderness area. Aha. And that's where science comes in. And that's the road we were walking down is a science-based decision. And that ended up leading to the cancellation of those two leases in 2016. Under federal law, I told you the BLM makes these decisions, controls our national leases, except in Minnesota, only state in the union. In Minnesota, there is a separate federal law that says any mining approvals in the Superior National Forest and the Chippewa must have the consent of the Forest Service. And when the Forest Service concluded that this was the wrong place for a sulfide-ore copper mine, it also withheld its consent from the renewal of those Twin Metals leases, and they were canceled on December 15th, 2016. So we went into the Trump administration with no existing federal leases, a mineral withdrawal process that continued for 20 months. Unfortunately, this is what happened. So the Lyndon Johnson administration looked at those leases, put out a press release, said this lease only lasts for 20 years. If they're not under commercial production, it's the end of the leases. Ronald Reagan looked at the leases in 1986, his administration, and his lawyers wrote a memo that said they've never commenced commercial production. they have no rights to renewals of those leases. President Bush 1 ended up renewing the leases as a discretionary renewal, but as a discretionary renewal, they turned to the Forest Service and said, do you consent? The Forest Service consented. Likewise, the second renewal was under President Bush 2. Same thing, BLM ended up doing a discretionary renewal, but turned to the Forest Service and said, do you consent? And the Forest Service consented. So here we are with a third renewal. The Forest Service withholds its consent, which it has a right to under federal law, statutory authority. The leases were canceled. So what happened during President Bush? He's got a new lawyer whose career had been working for the Koch brothers, no natural resource law experience that any of us can figure out. And he's decided everybody's been wrong. Those 5 prior administrations, they're wrong. He looked at the language of the lease and somehow said, it's kind of vague, I don't get it. And he decided that those 1966 leases gave rights of renewal, mandatory rights of renewal forever. Forever, that's a long time. So under that new legal opinion, those leases were unlawfully resurrected and then renewed. And so under this 4-part strategy, we had to start all over. We're back to where we were in 2012. We have leases unlawfully renewed. We've sued. Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness and the Wilderness Society are the lead parties in those lawsuits, and restarting the mineral withdrawal. The second part of our strategy is permanent protection, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but Congress can make a withdrawal last forever instead of the 20 years that the Biden administration has authority for. The third strategy was go to the state, and I'll talk a little more about that, but we think that the mining rules in Minnesota are inadequate to protect the boundary waters, and we have been successful in our lawsuit challenging them. I'll talk to you about that because that's a second comment period. And last, we need state legislation to permanently ban copper mining on state public lands. Lacey, it's not quick. Okay, what did you do?
I just think I need to touch the screen.
Touch the screen, okay. So in dealing with this, how do we approach this? First, we built a really big coalition of diverse interests, really experienced people, smart people, people who've been involved in protecting the Quetico Superior for decades, but also people from around the United States. And we designed our campaign around awareness. All of you know about Dave and Amy Freeman, our heroes, who started adventure advocacy as a way to reach America. With their paddle to DC, 101 days of paddling from Ely to Washington, DC, to a year in the wilderness, where they spent a year in the boundary waters, and many of you went in for resupplies. And they even appeared on the Today Show from deep in the wilderness, which is kind of fun, to a lot of other efforts to build awareness so that the American people knew about the threat to the boundary waters. We do political advocacy. Just as Donald Trump was political when he stood up on that stage, we know we have to go to our elected officials. We know we all, as a people, have to advocate with our elected officials, tell them why this place is important and why this is the wrong place for copper nickel mining. And litigation I talked about, science I talked about, and then building this organization. I think one of the best parts of the organization we built is Kids for the Boundary Waters. So as I stand here now, more than 150 kids, youth, have gone to Washington, DC to lobby for the boundary waters. They're Widgie campers, they're Minojan campers, they're Girl Scouts, they're Boy Scouts. They're kids from all over the United States. We even had one kid fly up from Peru, whose father had worked for Voyager Outward Bound School. So it's a big cause for these kids to fight to protect for the boundary waters. And they're our future. You know, what you learn from this fight is that you have to be vigilant forever. And we need a next generation to carry on this fight. So I'm going to talk first about the federal withdrawal process, which relates to what happened last week. So this is what a federal path to permanent protection looks like. Last Thursday, October 21, there was a publication in the Federal Register. That publication did two things. It took lands that were in the Forest Service's application for a mineral withdrawal, 225,378 acres, and it segregated them from the federal mining program for up to 2 years. It's called a segregation. But basically what it did was remove all those lands and minerals from any mining approvals for 2 years. The second thing it did was start the process to gather information, to gather science, to gather economics, so that at the end of the day, the Secretary of the Interior can make the decision on a 20-year ban. So that was the first step. The second step is a decision by Secretary Deb Haaland on a 20-year mining ban, mineral withdrawal. And then the last step is Congress making the ban permanent. So that's a federal pathway. So mineral withdrawals or mining bans protect public lands and minerals. It only applies to federally owned minerals. So it doesn't apply to private minerals, doesn't apply to state minerals, only federal minerals, part of that 640 million acres of federal minerals that we as a people own. It bars the issuance of federal leases and prospecting permits on lands that have been withdrawn from the federal mining program. So two kinds, we've talked about this. The first one is an administrative mineral withdrawal that can be done by the Biden-Harris administration after the study is completed in the next year or two, and it lasts up to 20 years. You can renew them. So it can go from 20 years to 20 years to 20 years. And then the permanent withdrawal. So we've already had a permanent withdrawal here in the Boundary Waters. Remember I talked about Vice President Mondale and the 1978 Boundary Waters Wilderness Act. That act banned mining inside the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. Interestingly, at the time, all other wilderness areas within the National Wilderness Preservation System still allowed mining. There was under the '64 Wilderness Act, mining was allowed on national wilderness lands until 1984. But Congress stepped in and said, we know this is the worst place in the National Wilderness Preservation System for mining, so we're going to jump in and ban it permanently in 1978. It also, so that's a mineral withdrawal, a permanent mineral withdrawal by act of Congress. The '78 Act went one step further, and it imposed a federal mineral withdrawal on 220,000 acres of superior national forest land, because that was also a bad place for mining. The 220,000 acres cover the Gunflint Trail, the Fernberg, the Echo, and a strip of land on the south side of the Trout Lake Unit. All places where people access and enter into the Boundary Waters, clearly places where you would not mine. So we already know what mining bans are here. We also know that although they were controversial in 1978, I think there are very few people who would now say, oh, that was wrong, we really should have mining in those places. My point is, it's controversial now, what we're talking about, but the wisdom of it will be apparent to the American people very quickly, because this is, as I say, the wrong place for a mine. So how does this process work? The Forest Service filed an application for a 20-year mineral withdrawal. That triggered the process. And by filing it, it means they delivered it to the BLM and the Department of Interior across the mall from the Forest Service. The Forest Service on one side, Ag, Interior, BLM on the other side. They delivered that application and they covered 225,378 acres. So that triggered the process. It was accepted by the BLM. We then have the segregation of the 225,378 acres. Last Thursday started the 90-day comment period. Once those comments are in, the Forest Service will analyze them and prepare a report. I think this time we're not likely to get fully redacted pages. The American people are going to see the study and the report. And then when that's done, it goes to the Forest Service report with a recommendation, goes back to the Interior Department, and Secretary Deb Haaland makes the decision. It's subject to valid existing rights, which is why we're really hoping Interior recognizes that the two existing leases are unlawful. All right, this is a beautiful map. This is a map of the 2021 federal mineral withdrawal. So the software that the government uses doesn't really do squiggly lines. This, however, is the Laurentian Divide, just 90-degree angle. So this is the Laurentian Divide, where all surface waters flow north into the boundary waters and on to Voyageurs National Park. Now, remember I talked about the 78 Act and the mineral withdrawal that was outside the wilderness along the Fernberg and the Echo? That's this and that. MPA stands for Mining Protection Area, okay? Everything that is in gold represents all the lands and minerals that are under a unified ownership of the federal government. So we, the people, own the minerals and the surface land everywhere that's gold. You'll see around Birch Lake, that's a lot of land. Up on the White Iron Chain, up around Burnside, there's a lot of land that would be protected around Burnside Lake, the east arm, the north arm. So this is very personal to all of you here in Ely. This is where you live, and this is where you recreate. All of that would be protected, and sulfide-ore copper mining would be prohibited if Secretary Haaland agrees to do that and issues an order. It would be banned from mining for 20 years. As I say, once it settles down, who can argue with that? All of that is immediately south, upstream of the wilderness. We have copies of the map. I just think it's such a beautiful map. So we have copies here for you to take with you. Now, I said there was a second step in the federal process, and that's permanent legislation, and that's HR 2794. HR 2794 was introduced first as HR 5598 by Congresswoman Betty McCollum in the House. There was a hearing in the Natural Resource Committee. Jason Zaborski from Ely was one of our witnesses testifying. Another witness was retired Forest Service Chief Tom Tidwell. He is the one who made the decision that this was the wrong place for a copper mine. Now, he's from the West. He had been a regional forester in Montana. He's now retired and he lives in Idaho. And he's very familiar with mining, but he's also very familiar with mining in places that don't have a whole lot of water. And what was critical to his decision, he says, is that he came to Minnesota, he'd never been to the Boundary Waters, and he drove to the Gunflint Trail with the forest supervisor, Brent Halter, and he got into a Forest Service seaplane, a Beaver, and they flew him across the Boundary Waters, all the way to Shagwa. He had the pilot fly down and circle around the South Cowishui River and Birch Lake. And when he landed, he knew absolutely this was the worst place in the National Forest System for copper mining. And that sealed the deal with him, all that beautiful, clean water. So in the prior Congress, after the hearing in front of the Natural Resource Committee with Tom Tidwell and Jason, the committee passed out the bill to the floor of the House. The bill has now been reintroduced on April 1st. Did I use this? Now, okay, I wanted to just show this map to you quickly before I finish the story on the bill. Betty's bill links to the map from the 2016 mineral withdrawal. And when she introduced 5598 and again 2794, there was no new October 2021 map. So it's a little different. So when you look at her bill, you'll say, oh my goodness, she has 234,000 million acres protected, not 225. And that's because it links to this original map. It achieves the same goal. This map is good because you can see the MPAs. This one you can see the Gunflint, Fernberg, Echo, and then the strip under the Trout Lake unit. So the 1978 withdrawal was all the dark green, all the light green. So 2794 was introduced on Earth Day. That was appropriate. It has 48 co-sponsors. Our team is working every day, virtually, talking to people around the country to get more co-sponsors for the bill. We are using it to advocate for a Senate counterpart. And we think next year provides opportunities to pass this bill into law and make it permanent forever. So we've already gone over this, but this is just a quick redo. We're now in this part of the process, the 2-year freeze and the study, where your comments come in, and then we march down that line. No. Now we're going to talk about the state path to permanent protection, and don't go too far. Aha. Okay. Now we've seen this map. This is the Rainy River headwaters. This area right here. Half of it protected wilderness. Half of it is not protected wilderness. Now the Rainy River headwaters, this subwatershed, is a really interesting area, and I mentioned this earlier. In 2017, Minnesota's Pollution Control Agency issued its water quality assessment for the Rainy River headwaters and concluded that throughout the headwaters, so that southern unprotected half, as well as the northern protected half, had water quality that was exceptional. And they described it as immaculate. Where else in Minnesota has water quality been described as immaculate? It's a beautiful word. I like it. I like the beautiful map. I like that word. It tells us that this is an extraordinary place. But the Pollution Control Agency then went one step further and said, we encourage that more protection be provided for the Rainy River headwaters. In many of the watersheds that the PCA is studying, virtually all of them, they're calling for restoration. They're not calling for restoration here. They're calling for more protection, which is really stands out and stands alone in Minnesota. And part of that is because the downstream half has the highest level of protection under federal law, truly exceptional place. And we're allowing in the upstream half a dangerous type of mining that the EPA calls the most toxic industry in America. Every year, the EPA releases its inventory of toxic releases in America. And you can pretty much count every year that 40% of those releases of toxic substances in America comes from hard rock mining, far and above any other industry. And so our fundamental question here is, do you put the most toxic industry in America that always degrades water quality? It's also going to degrade air quality. We're going to have noise pollution, light pollution, devastation of the forested landscape, harm to endangered species, invasive species problems. Do you put the most toxic industry in America in the watershed that is the very best in Minnesota? That's the basis of our state argument. And so we took that science, which comes from the state, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness sued the Minnesota DNR. We sued in June of 2020, and we challenged the non-ferrous mining rules in Minnesota. Now, non-ferrous sounds really fancy, but it's everything but iron ore. So it's not taconite mining, it's not iron ore mining. It's a separate set of rules called non-ferrous mining rules. But the rules are fundamentally flawed because under the rules, the boundary waters is a place where no mining should occur, consistent with a 1976 state law that said no mining in the boundary waters. But it allows mining in the upstream half of the Rainy River watershed. Now, there's this incredible law called the Minnesota Environmental Rights Act, passed in 1972. There is a provision in the law called Section 10. We brought a lawsuit under Section 10. Now, this is 2020. Nobody's ever brought a lawsuit under Section 10 in the history of MIRA, the Minnesota Environmental Rights Act. Section 10 said any one of you and any organization based in Minnesota can challenge a state policy or law or regulation claiming that it is inadequate to protect the natural resources in America from pollution, impairment, and destruction. So we took all that science, we put it in our complaint, make a great story, our case, and we said the non-ferrous mining rules, by allowing mining in the upstream half of the Rainy River headwaters, fails to protect the boundary waters from pollution, impairment, or destruction. Now, what's interesting about that lawsuit, so it's in state court and Ramsey County District Court. The DNR, how did the DNR respond? We sued them. They said to the court, we believe Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness has made a prima facie case that the rules are inadequate. And it was based on the science in our complaint. As a result of that, we negotiated a stipulation with the DNR that we together took to the court. Under Section 10, when you establish a prima facie case, so we actually didn't have to put on evidence because it was so clear from our lawsuit. We got Chief Tidwell, the head of the Forest Service, who, by the way, whose opinion withholding consent to mining in this place through all those 4 Trump years was never withdrawn. It's a live document as I stand here today. The decision that Chief Tidwell made. You got the chief of the Forest Service saying this is the wrong place. Then what happened was that Twin Metals intervened, complained about everything, has done what are called interlocutory appeals 3 times, made a motion to dismiss, it was denied. We're still fighting one of these, what are called interlocutory appeals, these appeals that occur in the middle of a case. But the court on September 13th ordered that this matter would be remanded to the DNR. So under Section 10, that's what happens. Once the plaintiff, Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness, establishes its prima facie case, the court is directed to remand it to the DNR to consider the facts and the evidence and have a process to decide if it thinks our rules are inadequate. Based on that September 13th order by the judge, It went back to the DNR. The DNR had 3 weeks to issue its procedural order. How are they going to proceed? On October 4th, the DNR issued its procedural order. And it said it's going to look at 2 questions. Should non-ferrous mining be banned in the Rainy River headwaters? Are the non-ferrous mining rules adequate to protect the boundary waters? The only thing it's going to consider. It's going to start with a 30-day public comment period. That starts pretty soon. It starts on November 9th. So you lucky people have a federal process for commenting and a state process. You now have an opportunity to protect the place you love after all these years, which is great. Fourth part of our strategy was a permanent ban on mining in the Rainy River headwaters. That can only be done on state public lands by the state legislature. So we've talked about the 1978 Act, which bans mining on federal public lands in the mining protection area in the wilderness. But in 1976, the state passed a law banning mining on state public lands in the wilderness. And so we need the legislature to do the same thing again, only this time ban mining on state public lands in the Rainy River headwaters. So we introduced bills in the House and the Senate in the last session. We need to push for passage in Minnesota in the legislature. Oops. Okay, so finally, what can you do? Taking me a long time to get here. Sorry about that. You can submit your comments. So the comment period on the federal process started on October 21. It goes through January 20. And I have here with me today, Maddie and Levi, and they are headquartered here in Ely, and their job is to work with all of you to write really substantive comments. You people know this area. You have a real stake in protecting this area. And we hope all of you will take the time to write substantive comments.
Becky, I submitted a very good comment before the thing was aborted. Do I need to resubmit that?
Yep.
Why?
2 reasons. Although we believe everything is sitting in a filed cabinet from last time, we can't be assured that everything's there. But there's even a more important reason. If you just, it's probably similar, and the same kinds of comments really can go to the state and the federal government, just as long as you have different addressees. One goes to Dear BLM, the other goes to Dear DNR, and you ask for different things. Second reason is that we have to show the Biden administration that this is overwhelmingly popular in America. We need not only you to submit your comment again, we need every friend and family member you have in America to do this. And Levi and Maddie will help you build our tent, build our coalition, get us to 200,000 comments. We're relying on you who know the boundary waters so well to really put substance in your comments. I don't know, Levi, if you wanted to add anything about, I covered it, okay. But Levi will set up comment writing parties. Maddie's here to help as well. She's dealing with the rest of northeastern Minnesota, so Friends in Duluth, Two Harbors, Grand Marais. Maddie's gonna cover that. You have a little time on the federal comments, but on the state comments, the period ends on December 8th. Yes.
Excuse me. The first comment I ever submitted on Parliament, I think, ran to 25 pages. And I'm wondering if you have any advice on what can you submit if you wanted to have multiple comments, short and readable?
I think you want to I don't know that length is the determining factor. If you can say what you want to say in 5 pages or 10 pages or 2 pages, you should do it that way. So we'll help you with the science. We have a lot of science. We have a lot of economics. Study after study shows that our region does better, both in terms of jobs and income, if we have no copper mining here. Our community is doing well. It's growing. It's attracting new residents, and we want to keep that going. This would be extraordinarily harmful to our community and our sustainable economy if it were to happen. And I would just say this, if there ever was a Twin Metals mine, it would be a minerless mine. Anglo American, which is a large international mining company, employs 87,000 miners in copper mines around the world. And it says within a couple of years, its mines will be automated. And the only local people they will employ will be a few people to handle public relations with disappointed local people. And in the meantime, it's going to be incredibly harmful for a lot of our businesses, for all the people who live up and down Birch Lake and the South Kawishwe River and on the White Iron Chain and on Fall Lake. You will not want to live there. And it's not going to make the Boundary Waters an attractive place to visit. And so for the sake of our economy and our community, keeping our ecosystem healthy is a key part of our economic argument. And you should write about that. Why do you live here? Why did you move here? What made this place attractive to you? What, how often do you go into the Boundary Waters? That's probably why you live here. And so you can get in your canoe and go any day you want to on a day permit. So think about your unique perspective. We're going to submit technical comments on the science, but what does it mean to you living in this place? So yes, you all have to do comments. You also should thank the champions who got us here. Both Betty McCollum in the US House and Tina Smith in the US Senate asked the Biden administration publicly to do this study. They deserve your thanks. Other members of the Minnesota delegation support that as well, and you can thank them as well. But really the two leads have been Tina Smith and Betty McCollum.
Becky, I've got a couple questions and actually comments. The previous study ended after 20 months because there really wasn't anything to study. Twin Metals hadn't announced its mining plan yet. And then how do you explain 2 Canadian gold mines in the very same Rainy Lake watershed, the Goliath gold mine east of Dryden, and the new gold mine northwest of Fort Francis? And we all know that if we can't mine here in the United States, we'll have to import the metals needed for green energy. And mainly that comes from China, who could cut us off at a whim. Now, nobody wants to see mining in the Boundary Waters. But if there is a national emergency, according to the 1978 BWCA Wilderness Act, the president could allow mining in the Boundary Waters, according to Section 11.
So 3 questions, I'll repeat them, and I'm just going to do them backwards, reverse order, and help me if I forget any of them. The first was a question about basically, don't we need these minerals? If we don't mine here, we're going to have to get our minerals from China. So the deposits that Twin Metals proposes to mine are low-grade deposits. They have a pittance of minerals. It is an irrelevant source of critical minerals for America's green economy. This is part of Twin Metals and Antofagasta's greenwashing. So let me give you some examples. Cobalt, let me answer your question, please. So cobalt, let's just look at cobalt, because that's a green economy mineral. The United States has a pittance of cobalt, very, very little cobalt. The cobalt, according to Twin Metals' own materials, that would come from a Twin Metals mine would supply 1.5% of the United States need for cobalt. So where do we get the other 85.5% of our cobalt? The Biden administration is looking to its longtime partners, and it's looking at a secure supply chain of critical minerals. Who are those longtime partners? Canada, Australia, Norway, and how much do they have? Australia has a lot of cobalt. In fact, one mine alone in Australia has enough cobalt to supply the entire United States needs for cobalt per year for 270 years. So we could destroy the boundary waters for 1.5% of our cobalt, or get our cobalt from Australia, Canada, and Norway, who are mining in arid environments and are eager to continue and expand their trade relationship with the United States. So it's irrelevant if you want to argue critical minerals. It's in addition to being insignificant. Now, let me tell you why it's irrelevant. What would happen if Twin Metals had a mine? It takes its metal concentrates and puts them on big trucks, which, by the way, would be driving through Ely. How many per day, Levi? 100 big trucks driving through Ely every day, put on a boat, and guess where they'd go? We don't have any way to treat that in the United States. Antofagasta sends all of its metal concentrates from its copper mines in South America to low-cost smelters in China. And once they get treated in the smelters in China, they're sold on the world market. So saying we need to mine here, or we're going to have to buy them from China, is an irrelevant argument because it's not true. Well, it is true, we'd have to get them from China, but after we stripped out America's natural resources, gave billions more to the billionaire family in Santiago, Chile, that own Antofagasta and don't give one hoot about you or the boundary waters, and we'd be sending our natural resources overseas, most likely to China. So beware of arguments like we need this for a green economy. You just dig a little bit into this and you realize they are false claims. The second one was, what about mines in Canada in the Rainy River Drainage Basin? Those mines are downstream of the Quetico and the boundary waters. I'm not here to defend those mines, but they don't threaten our wonderful Canoe country wilderness. So really that argument is pretty irrelevant. Canada is very opposed to mining in the Rainy River Drainage Basin in the headwaters of the Quetico Provincial Park and weighs in regularly with the Federal Administration of the United States to say so. The third argument was, well, that first study was canceled because there was nothing to study, which is, I'm not quite sure where to go with that. Federal law has set up the process for this site-specific analysis at the front end of places that are really valuable to America. We did it for the Grand Canyon in 2012. We did it for Greater Yellowstone twice, for Yellowstone National Park twice, including once during the Trump administration. So it is a regularly used process. During the Trump administration, the Forest Service had 3 mineral withdrawal studies going on. We weren't the only one. One was Paradise Valley, the gateway to Yellowstone National Park. The second was Methow Valley, a national forest, beautiful national forest in the state of Washington. And the third was the Boundary Waters. This is how it's done, folks. You do it on the front end. It doesn't matter what a mine plan shows. The question is this ecosystem. Science is well understood. We all are now educated on how watersheds work. And that's really the analysis. These mineral withdrawal studies allow you to look at things that you cannot look at when you look at a mine plan. When you look at a mine plan, you cannot consider the negative economic impact to a community, which would be huge. When you look at a mine plan under Minnesota rules, you cannot consider in permitting the negative public health impacts of this toxic form of mining. You can do that, in a mineral withdrawal study. So it is more comprehensive, it is broader, it allows you to make wise decisions. And if you decide as a people, this is the wrong place for a mine, you don't go through a long, agonizing 10-year period looking at a mine plan. Now, the Trump administration killed the study and rushed as fast as it could to get a mine plan review. So you can go onto the BLM website, you can go onto the DNR website, you can take a look at what Twin Metals is proposing. And if you want to ever be scared, go look at it. And you will see why this is the wrong place. Twin Metals proposes to put its toxic tailings on 430 acres of public land that it has no right to, state land, 600 feet from the shore of Birch Lake. It's using something called dry stack tailings technique. It gave us early on some examples of what they thought were success. So we checked them out. And the examples Twin Metals gave us were disasters. They all resulted in significant water quality degradation. What they're proposing to do is to take most of the moisture out of the tailings, so it's like sand, right? Build it in this huge 134 stack, 600 feet from Birch Lake, next to Keeley Creek, on wetlands, no dam. When it's dry, you'll have fugitive dust flying. We know the prevailing winds are out of the southwest, so Gabbro, Bald Eagle, South Coolishwee River, forget about those places because they're going to be impacted with toxic fugitive dust. What happens when it's wet? We kind of have a lot of rain here. Dry stack tailings was designed for arid environments, Arctic environments where there's no moisture. What happens when you have a sand pile on the beach? You just build a sand castle and we have a torrential rain or snow, it spreads out. Now the DNR looked at dry stack tailings. It was proposed as an alternative for the polymet mine. And the DNR is on record as saying dry stack tailings does not work in Minnesota, northern Minnesota's wet environment for the reasons I just gave you. And here is Twin Metals taking state land, which by the way would expose the state of Minnesota to Superfund liability because it'll be toxic, be there forever. Twin Metals is a limited liability company. There's no Antofagasta. They're shielded from liability. They have a limited liability company for a reason. It limits the liability of Antofagasta. At the end of the day, Twin Metals will own one thing, a polluted mine site. And so who's going to bear the cost of all that pollution for hundreds, if not thousands of years into our precious boundary waters? We the people are. And so if there ever was a place when you wanted to do
78 in the case of emergency that we could be mining in the boundary water.
That's true of everywhere. And so the fact that under a true national emergency, we could unfortunately go into Yellowstone National Park, Grand Canyon for uranium, all these places, heaven forbid that we ever get there. Of course you can, but that's not a reason to say today when we don't have that emergency, when we have long-time trading partners where we can get all these critical minerals, that's not a reason to sacrifice our boundary waters, which means sacrificing the viability and sustainability of this community and the world's greatest canoe country wilderness. So I've been on beyond my time. But thanks for the good questions. Levi and Maddie have petitions that you can sign. We'd appreciate if you sign these petitions. Everybody's voice matters. Everybody's signature matters. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions.
We signed the petition. That's not the same as doing the comment.
You still have to do the comment. Yeah, and we will help you with that. So this really, I think I'm pretty much at the end. This is where you go online, savetheboundarywaters.org/action. We're going to win this. We're going to protect the boundary waters, and I want to thank all of you.